Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. We have this common gap in manufacturing, like a replay movie. And yes, the buzzword of miscommunication is in every industry. However, in manufacturing, we have plant managers or general managers, and they have this expectation of their leader. And this replay movie sounds like this of, I have this leader and they're not really meeting the expectations. And I wish they would be more like this, or this isn't working out. And when you talk to that actual leader, they're not real clear on what that gap exactly is or what they're supposed to do about it. And if this sounds like you, it probably is, because I know when I ran manufacturing plants, I definitely had that gap and I just couldn't articulate to that person and we just couldn't get on the same page. So I brought another expert in today, Dean Heffta. He's a leadership and communication speaker and trainer, and he works in manufacturing and construction and agriculture. And he is an expert on closing this gap and working with leaders in that area. So Dean, what's our tip for our listeners? Why is this such a phenomenon?
Well, I guess the good news is it's not constrained just to manufacturing. Anywhere we put people together to try to accomplish something, we're going to run into breakdowns of understanding and communication. And so maybe that's the good news. The question then is, okay, so what do we do about it, right, Trevor?
Yeah.
Well, here's my experience. You hit on something very important there, and that is expectations. And in my experience, and I think any of our experiences, when we really reflect on it, the kernel that started the breakdown in the relationship and the distress in the environment really can be traced back to the expectations of the people involved. And there's an old saying that says, I know what I said, but I don't know what you heard. And the key role that we have as leaders in our environment is ensuring understanding about where we're going and who's responsible for what and all of those things. And that's the work to be done for leaders, is to become aware of how we are setting expectations, how we're fostering it, and the fact that our employees are not mind readers, and employing strategies to help increase the odds that people are understanding and that we're building this pool of shared understanding of who's doing what and where are we going.
Okay, so let's talk real situation here. We know that we got a plant manager and one of the teams just isn't engaged to one of their leaders. And for some reason, hey, but I've let them know, Dean, like I said, hey, we can see from the data, we got some surveys, team's not engaged, and then time goes on and it's not really changing. And so where do I go from here with this leader?
Well, this is a kind of maybe a multi-level challenge that companies face. And in manufacturing, we're certainly organizing our efforts and our materials and our people in ways towards producing this efficient outcome. And, when I think about manufacturing, I think it's interesting that every business, I believe, is in manufacturing, but it's only manufacturers that really know that. And so there's lessons that we can take from all over the place of understanding how we're creating value for our customers. That's what we have to set out to do. And when we think about these breakdowns of understanding, a lot of it has to begin with having a healthy leadership team in place. I don't believe you can fix the deep problems of communication inside an organization if your leadership team isn't connected and they aren't operating from a servant mindset. And so my experience is you begin with healthy leaders and that begins to transform the organization. Okay, so let's get to the point of the problem that you're explaining there. Here's one of the things that can happen is I'm in a position of leadership, which comes with it authority and responsibility. What can happen then is I believe that I also have power, control, responsibility, all of those things, and that people are going to do what I say. There's a bit of a myth around that. And leadership is really about influence. I don't believe you can lead without having influence. And in order to have influence, there has to be trust and understanding. That requires not a monologue of me telling people what to do, even though they're closer to the front line of the issue, but it's dialogue of us discovering together what is it we're really setting out to achieve? And that means that I have to have a humility mindset of I don't know everything. Now, I'll tell you a story about this. One of my first roles out of college, I was charged with a couple of things. It was a small family-owned company. I had sales responsibility, operations responsibility. I was in charge of a handful of employees, and I knew that I didn't have any credibility. I didn't have any experience that I was bringing to the table, and yet I was put in this position of authority. And I thought, how are we going to get things done without me thinking that I'm going to tell people what to do? Because part of it was I wasn't sure what needed to get done. I didn't have the experience. And so what I did was I approached all of the employees from a standpoint of let's look for the things that need to get done. Let's get them put on the whiteboard here. Every morning, let's work together on identifying who's going to do what. So I put myself in a position not of power or authority, but more of facilitation and involving people in choosing solutions, priorities. And so that was a very collaborative approach. And what that allowed me to experience was less of the boss subordinate dynamic and more of, okay, I just have a different role here in us getting things done together. So I believe it begins with the mindset that we bring into the relationship of, do people have the ability to solve their own problems? Do they have the desire to be successful? And in what way can I have a conversation with them so that we can be on the same page, aligned towards what success looks like?
I like the elimination of like, do you have a desire? Because we got skill and attitude. So if we can knock out the fact of that we have a desire and that we have some knowledge, but in that triangle, there's obviously a skill gap, because if I had the desire, my team would be engaged and we'd be getting good feedback on the survey. So there's some skill gap there. Is it sometimes the balance of, as that leader of leaders, and you see that this one leader is not engaging their team, is it trying to find the right balance of like, one is the real problem of, do we see the problem the same, that this whole gap, are we aligned on that? And then the next layer is, well, how much do I get involved of helping that leader get the team together? When am I stepping on toes? And then, how should I be helping? What have you seen in your experience?
Well, you're touching on something that is often overlooked. And I'm going to describe it as knowing what the problem is. So often, even as leaders, we're guilty in maybe sitting at our desk or driving into work and coming up with what we believe to be the right thing to do, the thing that other people need to be doing, right? Some initiative or some redirection or whatever it is. The risk of that is we might assume people understand what's underlying that, and that is a clear understanding of the problem and the goal. And when we come to our teams, maybe it's a line supervisor, or maybe it's one of my employees that are on the machine. If I come to them and start with, here's what you need to do, I've skipped a few pieces of this. One is I haven't clarified who's owning the problem. And if I am, well, let's back up. Who tends to get promoted inside companies, inside a manufacturing company? What are the characteristics of the people that often get promoted into positions of leadership?
They are rocking it. They can fix the machine, or they can get the best results.
So they're technically sound.
Yep.
Right? They have experience. What else do they tend to have from a characteristic?
They get along with their team usually, and they are fitting in, but they're not necessarily having to step back and do it with their hands behind their back.
Yeah. So when we put people into positions of leadership, often they are people that have the technical expertise. They are hardworking. They are responsible, right? So they have all of those histories. And what happens is they recognize, I've been rewarded because of my hard work, desire to take on responsibility, solve problems. And they keep doing those same things from a position of management. And what that creates over time can be a disenfranchised team underneath them, because what they're doing unconsciously, unintentionally, is they are taking on other people's problems. And when other people are going to take on your problems, you disengage from the work needed for it. It's like, well, I guess he's got this, so I guess I'm not going to worry about it anymore. So the irony is our most kind of hardworking, dedicated, problem-solving employees that we promote, The risk is if they are in distress. And so that's why I distinguish this as they move into stress because of time pressure and money pressure and labor pressures. We're going to begin seeing these over controlling, I'll step in, I'll take on your problems. And that begins this slide into the destruction of the relationship and the engagement of the team. Now, that's only one of 6 potential behaviors that we're going to see in people's distress. Distress is a form of miscommunication. Miscommunication is the number one contributor to the errors and mistakes and inefficiencies of an organization. And so often what happens is we see the outcome of this error, disengagement, mistakes, quality issues, whatever those, and we say we need to bring a program, an initiative, and we might, like that might be part of the solution. But if we don't recognize the human aspect of how our distress is getting exported into the entire organization, if we skip that, we'll never get to the level of productivity and engagement that we desire. And so part of it is recognizing manufacturing isn't just figuring out how do we perfectly place, where our machines are for high productivity and quality. We have to recognize that inside every part of our system is people. That's the X factor. And if our people are in distress, you're going to have a problem with the outcomes. That's why one of the number one killers of people is medical error. I'm going to jump over to the medical world. It's because people are in distress and they make mistakes. That same thing happens in our factories too.
Yeah, here's what I got to ask is that people are smart, right? Leaders are smart. We know we get into the cycle of, hey, I know there's something about my boss that he's not happy with, or this survey that I got back on how my team's thinking of me. So I'm worried more. I'm under more stress because I know my team's less engaged maybe than other teams, or our performance isn't the same. I know that I can tell my boss is not talking to me as much. They seem irritated with me. And it's kind of like, why is it that we start doing the opposite? We start to almost disengage with that stress leader. And then the miscommunication just compounds. Am I on the right path here, Dean?
Exactly, right? It snowballs. We actually go into deeper and deeper levels of distress. And these are predictable and observable. And it's tied to a very deep level of our structure of how we see the world and our perceptions of it and our psychological needs that we have as individuals. So people believe, we're recording this in English, right? So we assume if we are all speaking English that we're speaking the same language. Not the case. Different personalities are speaking different languages. And if we're not aware of that, the outcome becomes this breakdown in communication. And so what happens is I assume that other people are going to say and do things as I would. And when they don't do or say the thing that I would have done, I began attributing some sort of malice or incompetence to them rather than me understanding their perspective on how they're processing the situation and how they believe they're going to be able to address it in healthy ways. And so that's where that disappointment and frustration happens. And so the more in distress the leader becomes, the more that distress turns into miscommunication and gets embedded inside the organization. And you're right. Think about people in your life. When you see somebody that is angry or frustrated, are you thinking to yourself, oh, I need to go spend more time with them? No, it's like, I'm going to avoid them, right? And so the situation compounds. We have to be almost this contrarian in thinking, how do I approach that? And here's what so often happens is our default setting is we end up approaching the person that's in distress in ways that actually makes it worse, because we haven't been taught to interpret their behavior as actually a cry for help. And so these different types of distress behaviors are actually signals to us saying they are needing something, but maybe I don't know what it is they're needing. And so I end up joining them in distress. And then things get really interesting when everybody's in distress. Nobody is understanding, nobody's communicating. And what happens is we get further and further disconnected from each other. The furthest disconnection is when somebody quits or leaves the relationship. That's a separation, right? I'm out of here. You're fired, right? That's the resolution of that in an unhealthy way is I'm leaving.
Yeah. Then you end up losing all that investment, where if we had a different skill, a different approach, we can address that. And it seems like when we're having success and, we're on the same page, we're talking a lot, right? It's good. And
we're hitting our numbers, we're making money.
And then why is it we talk about this episode is around miscommunication, and if we kind of just bring it back to that, so here we are where we have some miscommunication, we're not on the same page, So we don't talk as much
Right.
because like I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with this leader, with this problem, and they should be able to do this. So our default becomes, well, we're going to stand back and see if they can do this or not. But so how do we make that switch, Dean? So that how do we fix this problem?
Oh yeah. Well, it's simple, but maybe not easy, right? And the encouragement is the best place for us to start in fixing our communication issues in our workplace is with ourselves. And how we do that is through becoming more aware of my own styles, how I tend to communicate, the things that I see most naturally. That's a part of our perceptions. There's 6 different perceptions we can use in different situations. Each of us are going to have one of those perceptions as our strongest way to experience the world, and that informs the stories that I tell myself about the world. And if I grow my awareness of myself, my style, the language I use, and then also the needs that I have in order to stay energized, now I begin becoming more resilient and more present as a person. And so that healthy person, that healthy leader has an outsized impact on the environment and the performance of their entire group around them. You've seen this, right? You've seen a new leader maybe come in that is healthy and experienced and confident and connected. And you've seen the entire dynamic, the environment change, the output change. And you've seen the opposite of that as well, right? They put the wrong person in there and they become attacking and over controlling and pushing their beliefs and catching everything that people are doing wrong. And you've seen the performance and retention of that group collapse. So never underestimate the power of the leader in that system. And so it begins with, do I know who I am, how I am, and what do I need to function at my highest level? When we're on a plane, they give us the safety instructions. They say, what do they say to us when the oxygen mask drops down? What are we supposed to do with it?
Let's put it on ourselves first.
Put it on yourself first, right? So if we want to take care of others around us, we got to take care of ourselves first. And that begins with self-awareness. And then it turns into us being able to say, okay, other people around me don't have the same experiences, perceptions, needs as I do. And that then begins allowing me to meet them more of where they are at. And the only way, here's the irony, the only way that I can understand somebody else is if I understand first myself well enough that I can remove myself from our equation together, our relationship. Then I can see them more clearly. Otherwise, my needs or my stories that I'm telling myself will pollute how I experience everything around me. You'll hear this. People will start putting reasons behind people making decisions, even though they have no idea if that's the truth or not. Oh, well, I'll tell you why she came in late today. And they're like, really? Like we're storytellers by nature. And so we come up with stories to fill in the gap. It's like, oh yeah, well, he intentionally let that mistake through the line just to make me look bad. Apply all of these attributes to people. And so it begins with this awareness of self that then allows me to be more present and be more resilient so that I understand that here's the bottom line. Fortunately or unfortunately, other people aren't in charge of how I am being. That's on me. And so I have to take responsibility for my anger and for my, outbursts and behaviors and things I did do and didn't do. That's on me. And that's why it's so important when we're choosing leaders that we're promoting people into positions of authority that are very healthy individuals psychologically. It's beyond just their technical capability.
When I think of this problem, it's easy just to go down the path of, oh yeah, that you can think of that worst boss. But the reality is most bosses aren't the worst boss, right? If you look at the averages. So if we say that the leader has 7 of the 10 people that they're clicking with, they know they'll give them honest feedback, but then there's this 30% that, 3 of the 10 leaders they're not well as connected with, and those leaders aren't doing as well. So do you have any stories or any advice here, Dean, on, if you're at that state, what do you do with those 3? What do you got to do different in starting with yourself?
Well, probably again, become a contrarian. It starts with being aware, right? So am I aware of where I tend to invest my time in ways that are more rewarding? That's our natural state. We do more of the things that are rewarding. We do less of the things that are not rewarding. And so if I truly have a desire to build those relationships and understanding with those 3 people, then I need to do just that. I need to be intentional about going out and better understanding them. Can't remember who it was, somebody famous in the past, right? They said, I don't like that person. I probably need to get to know them better.
I like
right?
that.
because we are storytellers. And so I tell myself a story about that person, about their motivations, about their styles, their capabilities, and all those things. And the key question for any leader is, how do you know? So we've ascribed all of these characteristics to this person. How do I know that's true? Well, be a contrarian and say, I'm going to go spend more time. Maybe I'm right, but how do I know? And maybe this person is just miscast.
When I think back to my learning days of 25 years of leadership manufacturing, I remember at one point I was writing down how much time I spent where and with who. And that really heightened my awareness of like, this is where I started, getting into the whole emotional intelligence and my self-awareness. And was like, oh yeah, when I actually write it down, I spend a lot more time with Dean. Really don't need to, probably, but we're killing it. And he's that old habit of, you lean on the people that are getting you the results, but then maybe without even knowing it, we're actually investing into that person and helping that person more. And we're actually neglecting those three people where we should probably get to know them better. And do you have
Well,
any stories, Dean, to leave us with here on,
sure.
what this success looks like in our miscommunication?
Well, these stories and this awareness is so important. So I had a CEO of a family-owned company. They did underground work, construction work, and 50, 60 some employees. And she called me up one day and she said, I got a real problem. I'm losing employees where people are resigning. I'm starting to find out there's a lot of drama going on inside the organization I wasn't aware of. And as we dove into it, all of it traced back to one of her three key foremen and a very critical part of their business. And as we got deeper and deeper into it, he's smart, hardworking, ambitious, like all the things you want in a leader. But here was the problem. He was smart and ambitious and impatient. And so he'd show up at one of the job sites. He had many jobs that he was running and would really immediately focus on what's got to get done and what's behind and really just attacking the problem. Well, people started telling themselves stories about his intent. And it turned into, this guy is a bully. He doesn't care about us. He just comes in for 20 minutes and bosses us around and leaves. Who knows what else he's doing? And so the drama started perpetuating because they started telling them stories about that leader. We went through a training course using process communication to help the leaders better understand the languages and the styles and the motivations and the needs. This leader began to be aware of his tendencies, especially under distress, which contributed to the problem those teams were having. To his credit, he took that insight, and I checked back in 3 months later. I said, how's things going? And the CEO said, you wouldn't believe the transformation that's occurred. What he's doing now is, before he stops on the job site, he gets himself oriented in the mindset of, what do they need from me to be successful, rather than what do I need to accomplish so I can get on to the next thing. And she said, productivity, retention, attitudes have completely transformed. And so for me, that's another evidence that it begins with me being self-aware and then knowing, what can I do instead to serve my team at a higher level.
That's golden. It's so much of our own mindset, and you can destroy those stories that are just not true. But if we're not being intentional on that, if we're not setting it, that's fantastic. Our listeners, when they leave and they think of Dean Heffta, what do you want them to leave thinking about? What's one thing for manufacturing leaders that you want to leave us with today, Dean?
Well, I think the big thing is knowing what my role really is. We can make assumptions about what it means to be a leader, but my role is really about fostering understanding and growing future leaders. I should be thinking myself more of as a coach and a servant to my teams rather than a taskmaster. And so being clear on, what is my role? And then if I've got an issue with a person, how do I make sure that I approach them with humility and curiosity to explore that issue together? That I don't have the corner on the truth. I don't know what they perceive their role is, or what success is, or that they understand what I'm seeing. And so being able to explore that with curiosity and humility and say, let's work on this thing together and have that conversation is the beginning of understanding what's really going on here and respecting people as individuals rather than just seeing them as machinery on our assembly line.
That is mindfulness in manufacturing. How do we get more of Dean Heffta? How do we get a hold of you? And when I first met you, you just had a book that's coming out. And how do we know more about this?
Sure. Yeah. So, anybody can reach out to me. My email address is dean at Clarus, CLARUS results.com. My website's Clarus Results. They can find me on LinkedIn. The book is about process communication model. Right now it's in France and soon to be in the US. And so I'll keep you posted on the US version of that, but it's called PCM Interaction, and it's about understanding how do these 6 perceptions and how do these 6 styles that live within each of us, these aren't types of people, these are types of personalities that we all have within us. How do we better understand that? And how do we take care of ourselves to be the best that we can for those relationships we care about?
Fantastic. I'm going to need more of this. The links will be in the show notes, and you've got me thinking different, which is what that's all about. Thanks so much, Dean.
Hey, thanks for having me, Trevor.
Hey, folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.